Sports Center, the Hall of Famer and TNT Inside the NBA analyst, Charles Barkley. First of all, Charles, how'd it go out there today?
Went very well. I screwed up, I think, 3 times, but overall, I'm very happy with where I'm at and can't wait for the rest of the weekend.
All right, so now we saw last year the birdie on 18 that kept you from being dead last in the tournament. You were 69th out of 70 players. Now this year, there's some action on you making the top 70. I'm not sure you're aware of this. Caesars William Hill has a prop bet that you can make the top 70. There's 89 players this year, so it's a little more difficult. What is your level of confidence after one day that you can make it into the top 70?
Well, I put $100,000 on myself, so I feel very confident.
$100,000 on yourself.
You know, I've been getting better the last couple of years, Stan.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to play really well all 3 days. But I had to take that bet because if I win that bet, I win $500,000. So, hey, I was going to gamble anyway. Might as well gamble on myself.
There you go. 5-to-1 odds. 500-to-1 odds for you to actually win it, win the whole thing. Did you put any money on that?
No, I just bet the one prop bet. I just got to beat the other guys, Stan. And,
Yeah.
And I'm going to make a lot more money than the guy who wins this tournament.
Okay. Yeah, when you do it that way, it works out. All right, so now we saw at the match, Aaron Rodgers said he would tell you in Tahoe what his plans were for the upcoming NFL season. We got the $100,000 bet. I'm trying to break some more news here. Has he told you what his plans are?
He's going to wait till tomorrow night at dinner. He didn't want to break the news on the first day here, so he's going to wait for tomorrow night at dinner.
Do you have any inkling?
Well, it's going to be a very interesting dynamic because the ball's really in his court. If he don't go to training camp, I think at some point the Packers will have to make the decision. Whether he's going to sit out the entire season. So I really think it's up to Aaron if he wants to play or not.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the NBA Finals. I'm sure you've been watching. The Suns up 2-0 on the Bucks right now. What has been the difference between those two teams so far from what you've seen?
Well, I think Chris Paul has had more help. All the pressure was on the Suns to win the first 2 games. Now the pressure switched to the Bucks. They've got to win the next 2 games. So before we start throwing the parade, let's remember it's 1st to 4, not 1st to 2.
So we see that, Charles, when a team wins at home, they hold home court, and then they go on the road, and it's a totally different scenario. What happens as a player when you're in a playoff series that changes when you go on the road?
Well, people aren't talking about your mom. They're not talking about your dad. They're not cursing you to death. But also, when that guy looks in the stand and see his family, he gets a burst of energy and juice. The crowd is going wild. You don't ever get tired. And let me tell you something, Stan. I want to say this.
All right.
Professional sports really suck without fans. So I'm just glad to have all the fans back.
It definitely adds to the atmosphere and the excitement. It makes the events feel big, something I think that was missing last year in the bubble. Let's talk about Chris Paul for a minute. He's on that list of Hall of Famers, future Hall of Famers who never won a championship up to this point. You're on that list. But how do you think the perception of Chris Paul's career will be affected if he's able to come through and win a championship with the Suns?
Well, I've always said I think Chris is the best leader we've had in the NBA in probably the last 10 to 15, 16 years. It's really unfair how a team sport, they hold it against a guy because he didn't win the championship. I'm hoping he wins it because he's on the list with me and guys who are already great, Karl Malone, John Stockton, Patrick Ewing, guys who are all-time greats. But like I say, I never understand how a team sport we blame an individual because especially if we blame him, he must be really great because we don't ever say it about the other players on the team. We only say it about the great players.
All right, and we'll be watching. We'll also be watching this weekend to see how you do. Now, I was at the U.S. Open. I talked to Sean Foley on the driving range, and I was asking him about golf, and he said, we think about the swing and everything too much. He said, you got to think about diet, you got to think about sleep, you got to think about breathing. So make sure you get some good sleep, get something good to eat, and take some deep breaths out there and try to secure that $500,000.
Well, I got a really great tip from Bryson DeChambeau the other day. I never drink water or eat when I'm playing golf. And he said he eats a lot. I think he said he eats 3,000 calories and he drinks a ton of water. And I got to tell you something, Stan, I drank more water in the last 2 days than I probably have in the last year because I hate the taste of water. And I'm actually eating during the round, and I actually feel refreshed right now.
Enough to get a few minutes with Stephen A. right now as he's joining us live, and I want to talk role players right now, Stephen A. in this thing, right? Because with Giannis either unavailable or let's say potentially not at 100%, it's going to fall back on Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton. Who would you say is more important in this series of those role players, Middleton or Holiday?
Well, the first most important thing I want to say is that your hairdo is lovely. I really, really like the hairdo, Al. It's really slamming. So I got to give you props where it's due, okay? That's number one. Number two, let me get right to it. Drew Holiday, I think, is going to be incredibly pivotal because of the way that he's been playing offensively. But the key thing is this. The ball is in his hands. He's got to make sure he doesn't turn the ball over. He's got to shoot effectively from the perimeter. But the biggest thing, Al, is this. He's got to defend. Because when you talk about the Phoenix Suns and whatever their success is going to be, it's predicated on the greatness of CP3 and Devin Booker. If you neutralize them in any way, you've got a significantly better chance of winning this series. If you don't neutralize them and you just allow CP3 to go haywire like he did in Game 6 against the Los Angeles Clippers when he dropped 41 points in about 35 minutes without a single turnover, then guess what? The Phoenix Suns are going to walk away from this series as defending NBA champions.
Yeah, we saw it. We saw Drew Holiday take exception to how Trey got it on him, right, in the first couple of games, and he decided to turn it around, and boy did he, before getting hurt. He certainly shut down Trey. We'll see if he could do the same thing with the Suns. I do want to talk about Giannis and Chris Paul, right? They're both currently in their first NBA final. Who would you say is under more pressure to win a title, and why?
Well, I think you're going to look at CP3 simply because he's the one that's been here for 16 years, okay? When he was playing in the NBA, we don't know how old Giannis was at that particular moment in time. At least I don't at the top of my head, but I don't think he was even in high school, for crying out loud. We're talking about a guy in CP3 that's been around for quite a long time. It's 16 years. He's universally recognized as one of the most illustrious point guards this game has ever seen. I think if he wins this series and wins a championship, he's a top 5 point guard all time. That's how I feel about him. You're talking about an Oscar Robertson, a Steph Curry, a Magic Johnson, a great Isaiah Thomas, people like that with the Jason Kidds of the world, the John Stocktons of the world. But CP3 is right in that conversation if he wins an NBA championship. So you look at this team as presently constructed, you see that Giannis has been compromised with that hyperextended left knee, and you say, excuse me, the Phoenix Suns have the horses that it takes to win this series, particularly with a hobbled Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Of many storylines, we are just over 3 hours away from tip to game one, and here is what we know. We know that at long last, one of the longest active title droughts in the NBA is going to end. Since joining the NBA together in 1968, the Suns and Bucks have combined to win one title. That was Milwaukee's, and it was 50 years ago. As for the Suns, they're the first team in NBA history to reach the finals after a 10-year playoff drought. The NFL's Bucks actually just did that earlier this year, of course, and we remember that ended with a championship parade and a tipsy Tom Brady. And for Milwaukee, it's 8 years in the making. The Bucks used a